Imagine if I told you that Professor Bauer doesn't know anything about teaching speech class. Would you believe me? I hope not. But what if I told you Professor Bauer doesn't know how to teach a speech class, and then Al Gore came in here and gave a presentation on why she doesn't know how to teach a speech class? Would you believe it then? Because ever since Al Gore's presentation on global warming, politicians have been quick to jump on the bandwagon of stopping global warming. Today I'm going to tell you about the fallacies of Al Gore's logic, the logic of the IPCC, and that of other advocates of global warming. But first, I'd like to give you a very brief history of global warming. In 1971, top climatologists decided that there should be research done because they thought global warming was happening and they should be prepared for it. And then in 1974, similar to what's happening now, the media tried to promote global cooling, even though scientists never said it was happening. In 1988, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Control was established for global warming. And in 2007, Al Gore won the Nobel Peace Prize for his presentation on global warming. Al Gore's presentation, An Inconvenient Truth, was about the effects of man-made CO2 on global warming. The Science and Public Policy Institute found 35 lies in Al Gore's presentation. He used false statistics, such as he says that polar bears are dying because their homes are melting and they're forced to swim to try to find new homes, and they die trying to swim there. When in actuality, only 4 polar bears have ever died this way, and they all died in a major storm. As a matter of fact, in 1940, there were only 5,000 polar bears on the planet. Presently, there are 25,000. He also says the Arctic is cooling faster than the rest of the world. The Arctic is actually 1 degree Celsius cooler than it was in 1940. Al Gore will tell you that the ocean is being warmed by the sun at an alarming rate, when in actuality, the sun is heated by the atmosphere, not by the sun. And he will also tell you that the Greenland ice sheet is unstable. The IPCC says that if the temperature raised by 5.5 degrees Celsius and remained at that temperature for thousands of years, then the Greenland ice sheet would become unstable. This presentation is so incorrect that the High Judge of the UK made it illegal to show in schools without first warning the students of how incorrect it is. The reason Al Gore's presentation is so wrong is because he bases his facts on the hockey stick graph. This graph is very popular in the IPCC because 3 scientists made it with information from tree rings. They disregarded all other data for climate and tried to figure out the Earth's climate for the past 1,000 years with just tree rings. Now, very quickly, I'd like to show you a video of what real scientists think of the hockey stick graph.
The past. So that created a very familiar curve that appeared in the early IPCC reports. And then suddenly, in 1998, a study came out, which is now referred to as the MBH 98, because the 3 authors' names, the first one is the one that's spoken about the most, which is Mann, published a report in which they completely rejected that widely accepted temperature graph.
The MBH98 graph became known as the hockey stick curve, where the shaft of the stick was the relatively constant lower temperatures for the first 900 years of the past millennium, and the blade of the stick the reputed sudden temperature rise of the past century. Although Mann's research was never audited, the United Nations and environmentalists promoted it as the smoking gun that recent warming was unusual. Finally, in 2003, Canadian analyst Stephen McIntyre, in cooperation with Ross McKittrick of the University of Guelph, decided to take a closer look at the data.
We carried out an analysis of the results to see what happened when we recompiled the data, and got quite different answers. Instead of having an extraordinarily high 20th century, we had a 15th century value that was just as high as the 20th century. So the hockey stick disappeared. It's a computer programming error that yields these high.
now that you've seen what the graph really should have looked like, can you tell why Al Gore's presentation was so incorrect? Even though it was so wrong, the IPCC tried to defend it by making another graph with the same information produced by the same authors. Now the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Control, is made up of 150 politicians. There are no scientists on the board. They do get their information from scientists, but they only have to release what they approve of. The IPCC was caught in The IPCC will tell you many false statistics, such as here. They'll tell you that the Antarctic is melting at an alarming rate. All of the area in the purple has been melting constantly. All of the area in the white, which is 98% of Antarctica, is actually freezing more and more each year. They will tell you that global warming is a fact because temperatures are increasing. Climatologists will tell you that the troposphere has to warm for global warming to happen. Clearly, you can see here, the troposphere is getting colder while the surface is getting warmer. This picture is taken straight from the Inconvenient Truth. They say that polar bears' homes are melting. This picture is taken from an area that in the 20th century was completely water. So prior to our century, it wasn't even there. They'll tell you that high CO2 levels cause temperature, when in actuality, you can see here, temperature reaches a maximum before CO2 does. What does this tell us? That temperature causes CO2. CO2 doesn't cause temperature. The IPCC was found in a scandal called ClimateGate, where a computer hacker found hundreds of emails between IPCC members where they were admitting to each other that they didn't know what they were talking about. They were manipulating information, and the scientists were telling them that they were getting their facts wrong. And in one of the emails, they talk about how they spent 25 years on a project to figure out the climate for the past 1,000 years, and they found that there's a possible fluctuation of positive 0.6 degrees or negative 0.2 degrees. Warwick-Hughes, a statistician, asked them for their data so that he could see where this fluctuation came from, to which a member of the IPCC responded, "We have 25 years invested in the work. Why would I make the data available to you when your aim is to try and find something wrong with it?" How good can their information be if they aren't willing to release it for people to argue with them? Many other global warming advocates will take information out of context to convince you global warming is real. Today I'd like to look at a few of the myths that you've probably heard and debunk them. Man-made CO2 affects temperatures. If this is true, then why does Professor Shunichi Akasufu, director of the International Arctic Research Center, say that 70% of the warming of last century happened before the Industrial Revolution? After the Industrial Revolution, we went into a decline, and the temperatures didn't start increasing again until after our next recession. The IPCC says that there are more small hurricanes in the last 200 years, but actually what happened is we have more ways of detecting hurricanes than we did in the 1800s, so back then there were ones we didn't know about than we know about now. They say that this is the coldest decade since 1880, which makes perfect sense because the 1880 was the end of the Little Ice Age. If you go back to the 1300s, or if you go back 8,000 years ago, the temperature was several degrees hotter than it was now for thousands of years. They'll tell you that the ice is melting more every year. Well, as you can see from this graph, ice melts every year. Clearly, those who claim global warming is true have done their research, and they found plenty of ways to manipulate the information to make you think they're right. In review, climate is not affected by CO2. The temperatures are just repeating their natural process. The global warming debate is fueled by politics, not by scientists. And global warming advocates only show you what they want you to believe. Now, I'd like to leave you today with a quote that I think accurately describes why politicians are so quick to stop global warming. The urge to save humanity is almost always a false front for the urge to rule it. Thank you.